The first thing I noticed about the human was her complete and utter lack of appropriate fear. My name is Velthora Kryn, Senior Combat Instructor at the Galactic Military Institute on Station Kronos 9, and in my 43 cycles of teaching tactical warfare to the galaxy's most elite soldiers, I have never, ever seen a species so fundamentally incapable of recognizing danger. The human female stood barely 5 feet tall, clutching a worn datapad against her chest, staring up at the reinforced titanium doors of Trauma Response Unit 7, with what I can only describe as cheerful curiosity. "Excuse me," she said, her voice bright and entirely too pleasant for a facility where the mortality rate during training hovers around 12%. "Is this Advanced Xenobiology 301? I stared at her. My secondary eyes blinked independently from my primary ones, a involuntary response my species exhibits when confronted with something so absurd our brains require additional visual confirmation. "No," I said slowly, my mandibles clicking with barely suppressed disbelief. "This is Trauma Response Unit 7, military, combat training, for soldiers." She glanced down at her datapad, swiped through a few screens, and then looked back up at me with a smile that could only be described as catastrophically optimistic. "Oh, my mistake. I must have taken a wrong turn after the cafeteria. These stations are so confusing, aren't they? All the corridors look the same." "They are color-coded," I informed her, gesturing with one of my 4 arms toward the crimson warning stripes running along every surface. "Red means military zone. Unauthorized personnel will be detained or eliminated depending on threat assessment." "Right, right," she nodded agreeably, as if I had just explained the location of the nearest restroom rather than outlined her potential immediate execution. "Well, sorry to bother you. I'll just—" She turned to leave. But that was when Cragthor emerged from the training bay. Cragthor is a Vrexian shock trooper, 8 feet of dense muscle and chitinous armor plating, with a jaw that can crush steel, and a temperament that makes territorial predators seem friendly by comparison. He was covered in training gel, green ichor from simulated wounds, and he was in what we politely call a heightened state of aggressive readiness, which is to say, he was looking for something to hit. He saw the human, processed her presence in a restricted military zone, and his combat protocols activated immediately. His crest flared red, his fighting claws extended, and he released a battle roar that registered at 140 decibels. The human jumped slightly. Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a terrified grimace masquerading as a smile. An actual, genuine, delighted smile. "Oh, wow," she said, her eyes going wide. "Are you a Vrexian? I have read so much about your species. The exoskeleton structure is even more impressive in person. Do you mind if I ask, is that a threat, display, or a greeting ritual? Because I have seen conflicting information in the academic literature." Cragthor stopped mid-charge. His crest flickered from red to confused purple. I felt my own combat instincts stuttering like a damaged processor. "Human," I said carefully, "that was a threat display. He was preparing to engage you in lethal combat?" "Oh," she turned back to Cragthor, with apparently undiminished enthusiasm. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to intrude on your training space."
I am just lost. My name is Emma Torres, Xenobiology student, first year.
"Well, technically, first week. First day, actually. I arrived on station about 4 hours ago." Cragthor looked at me. I looked at Cragthor. We shared a moment of profound species-transcending bewilderment. "You are lost," I repeated. "Very lost," she confirmed cheerfully, "in a maximum security military training facility." "Apparently, yes," And you are not concerned about this. She tilted her head, considering. Should I be? I mean, you all seem very professional. I am sure once I find the right department, everything will be fine. This, I would later reflect, should have been my first real clue about humans. They do not process danger the way the rest of us do. It is not that they are unafraid. It is that their threat assessment system operates on some kind of delayed fuse mechanism that only activates after the dangerous situation has already occurred, often while they are standing in the smoldering remains of what used to be the dangerous thing. Come with me, I said, because the alternative was leaving her to wander into something that would actually kill her. And despite my reputation as a hardened combat instructor, I am not actually comfortable with student casualties when I can prevent them. She followed me eagerly, practically bouncing on her feet as we walked through corridors designed to intimidate enemy combatants. So, what kind of training happens here? She asked, peering through the reinforced windows into various simulation chambers. In one, a squad of Keltorian commandos were practicing zero-gravity breach tactics. In another, Thraxian demolition specialists were defusing plasma mines while under simulated enemy fire. Specialized combat scenarios, I said shortly. High-risk tactical operations. Survival rates during training are considered acceptable if they remain above 85%. Wow, she breathed, apparently missing the part where I had just told her that 15% of trainees do not survive. That must take incredible skill. We passed the medical wing, where our trauma surgeons were conducting emergency response drills. Through the window, Emma could clearly see the simulated casualties, the sprays of artificial blood, the chaotic intensity of battlefield medicine. She did not flinch. She leaned closer. Is that a Quarvan anatomy model? I did not realize their cardiovascular system was so decentralized. That is fascinating. I was beginning to suspect something. Miss Torres, I said, stopping in the corridor and turning to face her fully. What, exactly, is your academic focus within xenobiology? Oh, extreme environment adaptation and trauma response mechanisms in sapient species. Her entire face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm normally reserved for intoxicating substances or religious experiences. I am particularly interested in how different species have evolved to handle physical damage and stress. My thesis proposal is on comparative healing rates and pain tolerance across 20 different species categories. Of course it was. Of course, the human who wandered into the most dangerous training facility on the station was specifically interested in studying how things survive getting hurt. Let me guess, I said dryly. You volunteered for this program. Actually, I competed for it. There were over 2,000 applicants for 15 positions. I was so excited when I got accepted. This is my first time off Earth, my first time on a space station, my first time meeting most of these species in person. She paused, then added with almost painful sincerity, I know I probably seem really out of my depth, but I promise I am a quick learner. Something that might have been concern, or possibly preemptive exhaustion, settled into my chest. The xenobiology department is in Section 7, Blue Corridor, 3 levels up, I told her. Take the central lift, follow the blue markers, and for the sake of all that is stable in the universe, do not wander into any more red zones. Got it? Blue good, red bad. She gave me a little salute that no military in the galaxy would recognize as proper protocol.
Thank you so much for your help, Instructor Kryn.
I watched her walk away, her small form disappearing around the corner with that same bounce in her step. Cragthor came to stand beside me, his crest still showing traces of confused purple. That was a human, he said. Yes. She did not run. No, she should have run. Absolutely. We stood there for a moment, processing. I do not like this, Cragthor announced. Prey species should exhibit prey behavior. It is disturbing when they do not. I could not argue with his logic. What I did not know then, what none of us knew, was that Emma Torres would not make it to the xenobiology department that day. She would take a wrong turn, again, and end up in the gallery overlooking Training Bay 5 during an active combat simulation. She would watch, fascinated, as elite soldiers from 6 different species engaged in a brutal close-quarters combat scenario. And when the simulation ended and the participants filed out, covered in sweat and training gel and minor actual injuries, because some of our scenarios are extremely realistic, she would be waiting by the exit with her datapad, asking if anyone would be willing to answer a few questions about their species-specific combat stress responses. 2 of the soldiers would file formal complaints. 3 would agree to be interviewed. And 1, a grizzled Corthan veteran named Breckar, would be so charmed by her genuine scientific interest that he would mention her to me the next day. There is a human asking questions about the training programs, he said. I closed my eyes and felt the universe confirming my suspicions. Small? Enthusiastic? Apparently unaware of basic survival instincts? That is the one. Of course it was. What happened next would become something of a legend on Station Kronos 9, though the details have been exaggerated in the retelling. I will provide the accurate account here because someone should, and because I was unfortunately present for most of it. 3 days after her initial wrong turn, Emma Torres appeared in my office. Not my classroom. My office. The one in the secure military wing that requires 3 separate security clearances to access. She was holding a stack of datapads and wearing what appeared to be visitor credentials that she absolutely should not have been able to obtain. "Instructor Kryn," she said brightly, as if we were old friends meeting for lunch rather than an unauthorized civilian breaching military security. "I hope I am not interrupting, but I have a proposal I wanted to discuss with you." I stared at her. My office door, which should have been locked, stood open behind her. "How did you get in here?" "Oh, Lieutenant Vreskar let me through. I mentioned I was here to see you about a research opportunity, and he seemed to think that was fine. I made a mental note to have Vreskar retrained on security protocols, possibly by making him run the jungle survival course until he understood the concept of verification." "What research opportunity?" I asked, despite my better judgment. Emma set her datapads on my desk with the careful enthusiasm of someone presenting a birthday gift. "I want to embed with your combat training unit as a researcher." I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a dismissive snort, but an actual full-throated laugh that echoed off the metal walls of my office and caused my secondary mandibles to click in amusement. Emma Torres did not seem offended. She simply waited, her hands folded neatly in front of her, that patient smile never wavering. "You want to embed," I repeated once I had recovered, "with a combat training unit, as a researcher. You, a first-week xenobiology student who cannot navigate a space station without ending up in restricted military zones." "Yes," she said simply. "Absolutely not." I brought a formal proposal. She tapped the top datapad. "Approved by the xenobiology department head, Professor Quentrix. She thinks it would be an excellent opportunity for cross-departmental collaboration. The potential applications for medical research alone would be substantial." I picked up the datapad. Read it. Read it again. Professor Quentrix had indeed signed off on this insanity. The Thalaxian was notorious for her unconventional research methods, but this exceeded even her usual disregard for common sense. "The answer is still no," I said, setting the data pad down. My training facility is not a laboratory. These are active combat scenarios with real danger. Students die here, Miss Torres. Experienced soldiers die here. I will not be responsible for the death of a civilian academic who thinks battlefield trauma is a research opportunity. I would sign liability waivers, she offered. Complete medical and legal releases. The Academy would not be held responsible for any injuries or fatalities. How comforting! Instructor Kryn, she said, and her voice took on a quality I had not heard from her before. Serious, focused. I am not asking to play soldier. I am asking to observe how different species respond to controlled stress environments. Your facility is the only place on this station where I can study real-time trauma response across multiple species under comparable conditions. The data would be invaluable, not just for my research, but for improving medical protocols across the entire galactic medical community. I studied her, really looked at her for the first time. She was young, probably early 20s in human years. Her clothes were practical but worn, the kind students wore when they spent their credits on books instead of fashion. Her eyes, though, were sharp, intelligent. There was something there that reminded me of veteran soldiers, a kind of absolute certainty in purpose. 1 week, I heard myself say, and immediately regretted it. You may observe for 1 week. You will stay in designated safe zones at all times. You will follow every instruction I give without question or hesitation, and if at any point I decide you are a liability, you leave immediately. Understood? Her smile could have powered a small starship. Understood. Thank you, Instructor Kryn. You will not regret this. I already regretted it. The next morning, Emma Torres arrived at Training Bay. 5. At 600 hours sharp, wearing proper observation gear and carrying enough recording equipment to document a small war. The soldiers already assembled for morning drills stared at her with varying expressions of confusion, hostility, and, in Cragthor's case, resigned acceptance. "Attention!" I called, and they snapped to formation. "We have an observer for the next week. Miss Torres is conducting research on combat stress responses. You will ignore her presence and continue training as normal." "Sir," rumbled Grexix, a massive Thulian heavy weapons specialist, "is it wise to have a fragile species in an active training zone?" "She will remain in the observation gallery behind reinforced barriers," I assured him. Emma raised her hand like a schoolchild. "Yes?" I said wearily. "Will I be able to conduct interviews after the training sessions? Brief ones, just a few questions about physiological responses and recovery protocols?" The soldiers exchanged glances. "If they volunteer," I said, firmly. "No one is required to participate in your research." What I did not anticipate was how many would volunteer. By the third day, Emma had conducted interviews with over 30 soldiers from 12 different species. She sat in the medical bay, asking questions while trauma specialists treated training injuries. She observed meditation and recovery sessions. She watched as soldiers pushed themselves past what should have been breaking points and came back for more. And she took notes on everything. "The Vrexian adrenal system is remarkable," she told me on the 4th day, her eyes bright with scientific fascination. "Cragthor's stress hormone levels spike to what would be lethal in most species, but his secondary cardiac system compensates by redistributing oxygenated blood to critical organs. It is like watching a biological engine shift gears under load." "That is classified biological data," I pointed out. "Cragthor volunteered to wear the biomonitor," she said. He seemed excited to contribute to the research. He said, and I quote, "Tiny human asks good questions. makes warrior think about warriorness. I made a note to speak with Cragthor about his sudden philosophical tendencies. On the 5th day, everything changed. We were running a hostage extraction scenario, high difficulty, with live ammunition stun rounds and environmental hazards. The training team consisted of our best, a mixed species unit that had been working together for months. Emma was in her usual spot in the observation gallery, biomonitors tracking 6 different team members, her datapad recording everything. The scenario was going well, too well. Then the environmental system glitched. Not a planned difficulty increase, an actual malfunction. The atmospheric processors in the training bay started flooding the room with chemical smoke, dense and toxic. Emergency protocols should have activated immediately, clearing the air and ending the scenario. They did not. I was already moving, shouting orders, hitting emergency overrides. The soldiers were trained for this, moving toward exits even as the smoke thickened. But our hostage dummies were still in the center of the bay, and the team leader, a young Keltorian named Praxis, hesitated for just a moment, his training warring with his instinct to complete the mission. That moment of hesitation meant he inhaled a lungful of toxic smoke. He went down hard. The other soldiers were scrambling, trying to reach him, but the smoke was too thick now, visibility down to almost nothing. I could hear them coughing, disoriented, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of the observation gallery door opening. "Torres, no!" I roared. She did not stop. Emma Torres, all 5 feet of untrained civilian human, dropped into that smoke-filled training bay, wearing nothing but a torn piece of her shirt wrapped around her face as a makeshift filter. I watched on the still-functioning monitors as she moved, through the smoke with a speed and precision that made no sense. She reached Praxis first, grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him toward the nearest exit. He outweighed her by at least 100 pounds, but she moved him anyway, her legs churning, her whole body committed to the motion. A Corthan soldier loomed out of the smoke, disoriented, stumbling. Emma redirected him with a shove toward the exit, never stopping her drag of Praxis. The emergency systems finally kicked in. Ventilation roared to life, sucking the toxic smoke out of the bay. Medical teams rushed in. Emma Torres sat on the floor next to Praxis, coughing violently, her eyes streaming, her makeshift mask discarded. "You idiot," I said, kneeling beside her. "You absolute, reckless idiot." She looked up at me, still coughing, and somehow managed to smile. "He was going to die," she wheezed. "Could not let that happen. Not on my watch." "Your watch? You are a researcher, an observer. You had one job: stay in the safe zone." "People were hurt," she said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps, for humans, it did. Praxis recovered fully, as did the other soldiers affected by the smoke. The investigation revealed the malfunction was due to a maintenance oversight, which resulted in several technicians being reassigned to less critical duties. Emma Torres was officially reprimanded for violating safety protocols. She was also, quietly, offered a commendation by the station commander, which she politely declined on the grounds that she had only done what anyone would do. On her final day of observation, I called her back to my office. "You have completed your week," I said. "Your research data has been logged and approved for academic use. Professor Quentrix is apparently thrilled with your preliminary findings." "It has been an incredible experience," Emma said. "Thank you for allowing me to participate." I leaned back in my chair, studying her one last time. "The soldiers have been talking," I said, "about the human who runs into danger instead of away from it, who asks questions about pain tolerance while sitting next to soldiers being treated for actual combat injuries, who treats a toxic smoke incident like a minor scheduling inconvenience. She looked confused. I did not mean to cause any disruptions. You did not cause disruptions, I said. You caused something far more dangerous. You caused respect. I slid a datapad across my desk. This is an application for the Civilian Specialist Program. It would allow you to continue your research here, permanently, as an embedded academic consultant. You would have access to all training scenarios, medical data, and personnel interviews. You would also be required to undergo basic safety training, because I will not have you dying stupidly before your research is complete. She stared at the datapad like I had just handed her the keys to the galaxy. Are you serious? Regrettably, yes. I allowed myself a small smile. Against all logic and common sense, you have convinced some of the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy that a tiny human with no combat training and questionable navigational skills is worth listening to. That is a skill set I cannot ignore. Emma Torres picked up the datapad with trembling hands. I accept, she said immediately. You have not even read the terms. Do not care. I accept. That was 3 cycles ago. Emma is still here, still asking her questions, still appearing in places she absolutely should not be, with that same cheerful disregard for appropriate caution. She has published 7 papers on combat stress responses. She has designed new medical protocols that have saved lives across 3 military branches. She has, on 4 separate occasions, ended up in active combat zones through a combination of accidents and what I can only assume is the universe's twisted sense of humor. She has never once failed to walk back out. The soldiers call her Doc now, even though she is not a medical doctor. It is a term of affection, of respect, of acknowledgement that she is one of them in the ways that matter. Last week, I found her in the medical bay at 0300 hours, sitting with a young recruit who had washed out of the program and was devastated by his failure. She was not taking notes, not recording data, just sitting there, talking quietly, reminding him that failure in one path does not mean failure in all paths. The recruit reapplied to a different program. He is thriving now. This is what I have learned about humans, specifically this human. They do not process danger the way we do. They process purpose. And if their purpose says run toward the fire instead of away from it, they will do so with a smile and absolutely zero hesitation. It is terrifying. It is illogical. It is completely insane by every reasonable standard. And it is also, perhaps, why humans might just survive in this galaxy after all. Emma Torres walked into the wrong classroom on her first day. She ended up in the right place anyway, because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not the weapon or the soldier or the training facility. Sometimes it is the small human who smiles at danger and asks if